If we have COVID with us for the long term, how will you operate? How do you stage productions which have a chance of being in any way profitable?
Well, that is asking really almost the impossible, because I think it would be impossible. We know that theatre cannot operate with social distancing. We were really, really convinced that if we took one of our theatres, and we chose the London Palladium because it's in many ways the most difficult, that we could demonstrate that it was possible for theatres to reopen at full capacity safely. And to that end, we took the Secretary of State around the Palladium earlier in the year with the Officers of Public Health England, where I believe we did demonstrate this, which led to a pilot which we had hoped would be about demonstrating that the theatre could open at capacity, but in fact it turned into a socially distanced pilot, which really rather proved that it was almost impossible on a number of levels for theatre to work in that way. I am absolutely confident that the air, for example, in the London Palladium and indeed in all my theatres is purer than the air outside. The air handling, I think, is critical in all of this. I mean, the answer is to your question, though, is that it would be impossible. The margins, say for a big musical, are very, very, very tight.
The challenge is looking on behalf of the workforce. This has been absolutely devastating and catastrophic for the theatre industry and for the live sector. Over 300,000 people are employed by theatre alone. That's over 1 million people employed by this sector. That is huge. And that, of course, makes us uniquely vulnerable as a country in dealing with a pandemic, because the arts, performing arts, live theatre are not only one of our biggest assets and one of the strongest exports and things that bring in tourism. Over 34 million people come to this country every year, largely driven by the opportunity to see theatre. And if we don't actually do something to address that, and we don't find a means of actually being able to open theatres and venues again, then 1 million people will still be without work. It's been a very long time, and many of them have had no support. It's a really bad, catastrophic time, and we need to find a way out of it. So we started scouring the planet to look for mitigations and solutions. And that's what we demonstrated, I think, at the pilot at the London Palladium, is that you can actually open a venue successfully and professionally. In terms of what it actually was able to demonstrate, it was very disheartening that that wasn't then seen, and the pilot wasn't therefore seen as a way to get to full reopening. I think there was then nervousness about pubs opening and wanted to see what the impact of that was. We totally understand and respect there's a nervousness around looking at what happens when schools open. Schools have only just started reopening in the last couple of weeks, but I'd very much like to think that if that is successful, and we all know how important that is for the population as a whole, that then gives an added incentive to government to actually give us a conditional reopening date, because we need the time to plan. We can't switch on theatre like a tap. You need 3, 4, 5 months planning minimum to even get shows staged. So my nervousness, and I know Andrew shares this, is that Christmas is very much hanging in the balance as we speak. I mean, in terms of cost, I think we spent over £100,000 putting that pilot on. We had some incredibly generous offers. Beverly Knight, who's a very good friend of ours, performed for free, which was amazing of her. But we would have lost an awful lot more money if people like her hadn't shown their generosity.
But, you know, there comes a point now where we really can't go on much more. I mean, we're bumping up against our bank covenants and all of these things, because, as I say, theatre is an incredibly labour-intensive building, a business. In many ways, putting on a show now is almost a labour of love. I mean, very, very few shows really, really hit the jackpot in the way that, say, a Hamilton or a Lion King or a Phantom of the Opera do. And it is absolutely imperative that people understand that you just cannot throw a theatre show up. It's not like a cinema. You can't just open the building. I have to take the decision about whether we go into rehearsal with my Cinderella or not. If I don't go into rehearsal, there is also the chance that it might open somewhere where people are being a little more helpful.
To the core of what we're saying, we don't want to open theatres on a socially distanced basis. I have no intention of opening buildings on Andrew's behalf at a 30% capacity.